Let's make a start. Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing today? All good? Yeah.
There's the excitement.
There's the excitement. I know it's still early on the Saturday morning, so I'm sure like many of you still be in bed normally, so appreciate you all being here. So welcome to the session. We're going to talk about web APIs, a little bit of background. So my name's Carl, I'm a developer advocate at Vonage. We provide communications APIs for messaging, voice, video, and it's my job to help and support developers to use our APIs. So naturally, I think web APIs are awesome. I hope that by the end of the session, you'll all agree with me. So I'm based in North Wales. When I'm not working, I like getting out to the outdoors and mountains. But yeah, I spend a lot of my time working with web APIs, so we're going to look at that today. So we're going to look at a few things. We're going to look at what web APIs are, why they're useful, why you might want to use them, how to use web APIs, and then spend the second half of the session kind of working through a really basic kind of sample app to send an SMS using the Vonage SMS API. So yeah, quick show of hands. Who has used a web API before? Okay, a few of you. What have you done? Anyone want to? No one wants to speak. That's cool, right. Okay, who has maybe heard of web APIs or knows a little bit about them but has not actually used one? Maybe a little bit. And who kind of knows very little or nothing about web APIs? Okay, so quite a mix there. Okay, we'll go through the basics then. We'll kind of cover pretty much everything. So we'll start off with kind of what web APIs are. So before we go into that, we probably should answer another question. What are APIs? So this is one of many acronyms that we have in tech. Does anyone want to take a shot at answering this question? What's an API? Anyone want to? No, everyone's really quiet today. That's cool. So an API is application programming interface. And basically all that means is it's a way for applications or systems or computer programs to communicate with each other. So they expose kind of endpoints and they can use those endpoints to kind of like send data to each other. So if that's an API, then a web API is essentially just an API that we use over the web. So let's take a step back for a second and think about what that means. So what is the web? What are people's conceptions of the web? What do people think the web is? No one's answering today, it's cool. Okay, so we can think of the web as an information system that we access over the internet. And a lot of the time, we think of the web as something that's consumed by humans. So we might access a blog post and read a blog post, or hail an Uber, or stream something on Netflix or YouTube, or send a tweet. But that's kind of all for human consumption, right? And that's generally how we think of the web. But there's also a web for use by computer systems and applications, and that's the web of web APIs, and that's what we're going to look at today. So, because web APIs are used over the web, they use all the kind of standard web technologies like HTTP and URLs. So essentially, you think of web APIs as sending an HTTP request to the URL and getting a response back. So let's think a little bit about HTTP. So this is yet another acronym that we have. So it's Hypertext Transfer Protocol. So essentially, all that is a set of rules for structuring messages between applications. And so these rules determine like the structure of the message. So we have an HTTP request here on the left. We have a request line, which has an HTTP method, a path, which is the resource that we want to send that message to. We have headers, which are kind of like metadata about the request. And we have a response at the back, and these always work in pairs, or they should do. Like we should always get a response for every request that we send. So here on the right, we have a response with a status line, which tells us the status of the request. This one was okay, so we got our response without any problems. Again, response headers, some metadata about the actual response, and a body. And here's another example of a post request where we're sending some data rather than requesting it. And again, we get a response. So you might have noticed there was a particular header in some of those requests and responses, and there's this content type header, which is application JSON, right? So what is that? JSON, another acronym, which is JavaScript object notation. And essentially, this is just like a a media type. It's a way of structuring data, and it kind of looks like this. And that's important when working with web APIs, because we're getting systems to communicate with each other, and they need to communicate in a way that they can mutually understand. So they send JSON to and from each other, and there's still further steps that they need to do. Say, for example, you're working in Ruby, you need to kind of translate your Ruby code into JSON to send it, and then translate it back when you receive the response. So this is a process known as serialization and deserialization. So that's a little bit about what web APIs are. So let's think about why we want to use them, why are they useful. So there's a number of reasons why you might want to use web APIs. One would be to add functionality to an application. So an example of this might be you want to display some weather data on your website. Maybe you've got an event location in London somewhere, and people can go and look at events in the future, and they want to know, is it going to be sunny that day? It might be an outdoor space, right? And you're not going to want to go to the trouble of setting up the whole infrastructure for collecting weather data yourself. So what you can do is to look into an API. And there's plenty of these around. So you can send a request to a weather API with, say, a latitude and longitude of your location, and you can get a response back which tells you some information about the weather, like air temperature, humidity, that kind of thing, right? And then you can then use that information to display data on your website. Okay, so another use of web APIs is to build a product or service on top of those web APIs. So who's heard of something called Buffer? Anyone use this? Yeah? Okay, so Buffer is basically a social media tool to schedule posts on social media like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. So to use it, you can use their UI rather than interacting directly with those social media channels. And it basically builds on top of the APIs for those different social media channels. So you don't interact with them directly, you just interact with Buffer, and it's built on top of those. So that's another use case. And the final use case is integrating web APIs with each other. So this is done a lot in the context of kind of automating workflows and processes. I mean, there are some kind of things that you can do through services like this and that. That's up here. For example, here you can add a song or to a playlist on Spotify if you like a song on YouTube or something like that. But a lot of the time, this is done in the context of internal or private APIs. And essentially, these are, rather than having a monolithic application, you have lots of different applications that interact with each other. And this is kind of the basis of distributed systems and stuff like that. So let's look a little bit at how we use web APIs. So again, as we said earlier, it's a process of sending an HTTP request to an API endpoint and receiving a response, and then doing something with the data that you receive in that response. And the best place to start when you want to use an API is always with the documentation. So there's different types of API documentation. There's API spec, which tells you things like what the endpoints are, what requests and responses can look like, the different types of data that you can send in the request body, or the different types of data that you can receive in a response. There's code snippets, which often come in different languages for various SDKs, which we'll look at a little bit later on. Blockbuster Tutorials are great for getting started if you want to just build something really quickly. I kind of guide you through building an application, which is what we're going to do a little bit later on in the session. So when reading documentation or accessing documentation, there's a few things you want to think about doing. As we said, getting to know the endpoints. So these endpoints, so there's different types of API design, but a lot of the time you're working with REST APIs. And with REST APIs, the endpoints are basically a combination of an HTTP method, so here's a post method, and a resource or endpoint. So here we're sending a post request to this endpoint, or to this URL, and that's the endpoint. And once you get to know one or two APIs, you'll find that they all follow a very similar design or pattern if they adhere to kind of REST standards. So another thing we talked about is understanding the data that can be received or sent. So this will be like, most of the time this will be in JSON format. There are other formats, but like this is primarily what's used these days. So here we've got an example of a request body that for our SMS API. So there's an API key, secret, to, from, and text fields that you can send. Another thing to do is to get to know the possible response code. So this is important when things maybe don't go as expected and you get like an error from the API. So you need to know what that response code represents and how to deal with that response when you get it. And finally, you want to look at different authentication options. So different APIs will have different ways of authenticating. Some of them might use something called a JSON Web Token. Some might be like basic auth. Again, the documentation is the best place to look for. Another thing to do when working with a new web API is to try it out. So by try it out, I don't necessarily mean like you need to build like a complete application. You can try just sending a request to like a particular endpoint, and you can do that by say using curl, or a tool that I really like for this is something called Postman, and it allows you to just send a request and set a number of kind of values, and you can kind of check what the responses are. Another thing to do when working with APIs, or if you're intending to work with web APIs, is to get to know an HTTP client. So most programming languages have these kind of built-in HTTP clients, because essentially what you're going to be doing is from within your application, you need to send HTTP requests and deal with the responses, right? So a lot of languages, this is an example from Ruby of a net HTTP class, which allows you to do exactly that. So getting familiar with these different clients is really useful if you're going to start working with web APIs. There's also like external libraries, third-party libraries that you can use to do this. Like for Ruby, again, Faraday is a good one, but like all programming languages, or most programming languages, will have either built-in HTTP clients that you can use in their standard libraries, or third-party libraries that you can use for this. So even once you've learned all that stuff and you've understood the different endpoints and you're kind of familiar with an HTTP client, there still can be like some complexity in kind of interacting with web APIs. So another thing you can do is to use an SDK. So an SDK is a software development kit. So a lot of API providers will also provide SDKs, and these are basically code libraries that are built in specific languages. So say if you're a Python developer, there might be a Python SDK, which allows you to use that web API a lot more simply, because you can just instantiate objects, call methods on those objects, rather than having to do all the low-level stuff, like determine what headers you want to send, or like serialize and deserialize your JSON data. The SDKs will kind of abstract all that complexity for you and do a lot of the kind of low-level work. So for our APIs, we provide, for example, SDKs in Ruby, Node, Python, Java, probably missing something else, .NET on the back end. Okay, so another thing to do is to build a sample app, which is what we're going to do during the rest of this session. This is what our sample app is going to do. Essentially, we're going to have a form page, which is displayed in our client, basically our browser. We're going to submit that form to our app, which is running on localhost. Then the root in the app is going to take data from that form and use it to send a request to the Vonage SMS API, which is going to send an SMS, and then we're going to get the responses back. So I'm going to try demoing this. Wish me luck. Going to see if this works. Just to show you what should happen. Okay. Let's try this. Okay, so this is what the form is going to look like. I'm just going to put my number in there. Just put a message in. And hopefully this should work. All right, yeah, cool. So I've got my SMS. I was a bit worried there for a second. Yeah, so that's basically done what we said on the previous slide, which is kind of like we sent a request to our app running on localhost with our form data in. The route that's accepted that request is kind of taking that form data, the number of the message, and then use that to send a request to the SMS Vonage SMS API, and then that's sent our SMS for us. And the message sensitivity is just based on the response that we got back. So we've got like, yeah, we've got a good like 25 minutes, half an hour to work through this. So have people brought their laptops with them and want to work through this and build this app? You thought you didn't have to do any work tomorrow, right? You just sit there and kind of like drink coffee and stuff. But no, I'm going to make you do stuff. So, yeah. If you can come in and get your laptop ready. First thing to do is sign up for a developer account. You go to developer.bunch.com, there'll be a button on the top right, sign up for free, click on that. There'll be a form in our dashboard, fill it in. And then once you're in the dashboard, you can get your API key and secret, which you'll need later on. So at any point while we're building this app, you can refer to these sample apps, repos that I've got up on GitHub. There's one for Node and there's one for Ruby. You can build this in any other language you want as well, but I haven't got sample apps for, say, Python or anything. But if you're more familiar with another language, we've got SDKs in kind of multiple languages which you can use. How's everyone getting on? Yeah, enter, capital E, capital S, enter space for the white line. Oh, really? So if I need like another minute or two on this slide, okay. If anyone's having any problems, just raise your hands and I'll come out.
Yeah. It's actually easier for you to go to Wait. I had a look at it. It's like a pretty nice thing. Yeah, so it's enter space, and then the E and the S are also letters. Okay. I was like, here we go.
Yeah, I should have put the Wi-Fi thing up.
Oh, no.
I know. Yeah. Which one? No. The word and the letter. No, you said that's your reason. You want to see your name on your receipt.
Is everyone okay to move on to the next slide, or are we still kind of signing up? Okay, cool, that's right.
On stage, conflict looking in the wrong direction. Otherwise, it's a bit like a bumblebee. So do we want to select SMS?
Sorry?
Do we want to select SMS?
Are you doing it on your mobile?
Oh,
no, it's fine. It's like the layout's a bit weird.
just for the letter.
Okay, you wanna? There should be a link to the dashboard. It's pretty easy to do it.
Well, I'm going to go back to So you're fine.
So that's why they're closed.
Oh, okay. I mean, you just say
Well, we all just did that. Still going for a meal. That's
3 weeks ago.
yeah, we're speaking
Right, oh, right. Sorry, yeah, that's
Yeah, that's why. Yeah, so that you don't need to verify. You should be able to get your API secret. Anyone else still signing up? So you should get some credit on that. We'll also have like flyers at the booth later on with like €10 credits. If you want to use these APIs in any of your hack projects, come and see us at the booth and grab a flyer with a coupon code. Should we move on to the next slide? You can always come back to set up your account afterwards if you want. We'll kind of build the app and then we can come back to that. Okay, so next step is to create your project folder and files. So there's a couple of options here. You can either build it in Node, JavaScript, or Ruby. So the file structure is slightly different for both of these. If you're using Node, or for both of them, just create a new project directory, like CD into that directory. If you want to use Node from within the directory, just run npm init, which will create like a package.json file for you. Just skip through all the kind of like questions, or like click yes to all the questions. And then create the following files. So you want app.js, a views directory with an sms.ejs file in it, a public directory which has got a CSS directory in it, which has got a styles.css file, a .env file, and a .gitignore file. You only really need .gitignore if you're going to push this up to GitHub. Otherwise, you don't need to worry too much about that. For the Ruby, pretty similar. It's like an app.rb file. You want a gem file, a views directory with an sms.erb file in it, and then the same public CSS, styles CSS, and the env and gitignore. You got a question? It meant that you create an account. Okay, and we can come back to that afterwards. Yeah, you basically just need your API keys for using the app. What's that? Yeah, we'll come up to where we'll kind of build the structure of the app. If not, you come and see us at the booth and we'll sort out that.
I've used it for like
How's everyone getting on with building the project folder? Okay? Nearly there, okay. Stay another like a minute or two on this slide. Is anyone building this in Ruby? No Ruby does. Ah, that makes me so sad. Really sad. Node's cool though. Node's fine as well. I might make it my mission to try and convert everyone to Ruby this weekend. You got the question? Yeah, so that's fine. So it's like, so you can probably get. If you go to. It goes down, so you get your key to there. Oh, yeah, this is it there. So you'll need these later on, like when we set up the application. Yeah, you don't need them right now. How's everyone getting on with setting up the project folder? You haven't got Node installed or? A really old laptop. Yeah, that's okay. Like I'll try and share these slides somewhere later on or next week if people want to kind of try it out. Or we've got loads of docs and like we're posting stuff on our website. Check that out. Or like during this weekend, if you want to use any of our APIs for like building something as part of your hack project, just come and see us at Food and we can help you out with that.
Maybe do like a .txt.
How's everyone getting on? Should we move to the next? Yeah, that's okay. Okay, we'll stay on the slide for one more minute. Yeah, we've got like 10-15 minutes left, so we should be good. Hopefully.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, yeah.
Anyone need more time here? Yeah? All right. Yeah, you'll need this by the
Well, no, I thought
Okay. Yeah, I haven't got a job. We haven't got a job It'll be a pretty similar structure.
Are you gonna kind of randomly?
Yeah, so you want to create like an Node.js. The important ones like in any voice you want to yeah, use the EJS. Your question? Can I zoom in? Can I zoom in? Hang on. No, I can't, sorry. Is everyone happy for me to move on to the next slide? Okay, so now we need to install some dependencies. So I think everyone's working in Node, so no one's working in Ruby, so you can ignore the Ruby side. So you use npm install the following packages. So it's the first one's @voltage slash @voltage/server -SDK. That's what we're going to use to interact with the that's the server SDK we're going to use to interact with the SMS API. Then this is going to be an Express application, so npm install Express, npm install the body parser, which we're going to use to get the form data from the form. Then EJS as well, and .env.
Yeah, that's right.
Any problems with dependencies? I'm doing okay. You're like way ahead of the game here. I think you've done this before, right?
I'm just
Right.
super helpful.
Okay. Have you built many Node applications before?
No.
Oh, right. Okay.
No. Well, we tried, right? Yeah. It was good, but I didn't get very far.
We've got like another minute on this slide.
Yeah, we're going. It's two of us that are actually going to work this weekend. It's not, we think we've got brain power of 5, but really, computer power of 2.
Any problems with this? Everyone good? Yeah? Okay, going to move on to the next slide. So first we need to kind of require dependencies and configure our application. So again, we'll look at the Node one. Can everyone kind of read that? Or I could just share the actual files and my text editor if that's easier. Everyone's doing Node, right? No one's doing the Ruby one. Let me know. Yeah, so we basically want to require express, like const express equals require express. Same as body parser.
In the back, pretty much silent the entire time.
Can everyone read that? So I go to the text. I can go to the text editor here. Is it too small? Okay. What I might do is switch out from the slides and go to the text editor. Go on top of that. Is it the lights? We can turn the lights down a bit.
Unnatural habitat. Where we thrive.
So you're basically requiring express, body parser, bondage, and .end. With .end, you don't have to kind of assign it to a variable. You can just require .end and then call this config method on it. Line 6 and 7 here, just searching some variables for API key and secret. We haven't set these up yet in our end file, but we're going to do that a little bit later on.
No, you spelled it wrong. I wasn't going to delete one. I was just going to make sure we got it
Right now I'm creating an express instance and assigning it to this app variable, app constant. And on line 10 we're calling this use method. Use body parser. Line 12 is just setting which view engine we want to use, which is EJS, which is one of the dependencies we added earlier. And line 14 is setting apart a stack folder, the public directory we created.
All right.
How are we getting on? We've got like 5 or 6 minutes left, so we'll try and move through to the next slide. So we're setting up some of our routes here. We've got like a get /root and a get /SMS route. These are pretty simple. The /root, or the kind of default route, is just going to redirect to the SMS route. And then the SMS route is just going to render like an SMS template, which is the sms.ejs file. Yeah, I'll try and share them somewhere. I'll upload them. I'm not sure where, but somewhere, and then I'll share them in. I don't know if we've got Discord. We've got a Slack channel. Share them there, or I can Yeah, I'll just email that. I'll speak to the organizer.
What is it called?
Rename the file. Yeah, rename the file.
So actually, you know, looking at the slides, there's actually repos on GitHub for this project, so you can kind of look at the files in there if you want. That might be a little bit easier than working through the slides. I can get you the link later. Okay. Just going to move to the next slides. So, yeah, this is kind of really small, sorry. This is the code for the post SMS route. There's quite a lot of stuff going on here. It might be easier to copy this from the repo. So let me just show you that. So this is the node repo here. Just like super chill /demo-vonage-sms-express-app. So if you go to GitHub and look for that, you can just clone that back if you want. Might be easier, or you can copy the root, the post SMS root from .js file there. So we've got that URL that needs it. We're doing okay for timeouts? Yeah, okay. Okay, so yeah, I'm just going to put this back up. There's quite a lot going on in this post. In fact, I might just let me do this instead. Yes. This might be easier. Basically, line 25 to 28, we're creating a new instance of a vonage object, passing API key and secret. And we define the two number and message number, and set like a status message to the object. And then we've got some conditional logic here, depending on what happens with send SMS method here on the vonage SDK. I'm passing these arguments. Final thing to do is instantiate, it's kind of like, or initialize the Express app with app.listen. Set the port you want it to be 1000. And then in your .env file, you need to put your API key and secret in this format. All right, yeah, we need to build this form as well. I'd recommend just kind of copying it. It's mostly just HTML. Just copying this from the repo might be quicker. So this is in the sms.ejs file. Pretty much all HTML, apart from like conditional logic at the bottom. Tells us the status of our message. And the final thing you need to do is like in the .env file, set these two environment variables. One for the key and one for the secret, that you replace the values here with your actual API key and secret from your account that you created. And once you've done that, you can run node app.js, which should tell you that it's running on localhost, and you can navigate to localhost port 3000 in your browser. Hopefully you should see the form. If everything works, you can put in a number. So the number is use the country code and then your mobile number without leaving 0, and put in a message and send, and hopefully you should get an SMS. Has everyone got all of that set up? I know kind of like running a bit short time, so. If you didn't have time to get everything done in this session, you can come and see us at the booth afterwards, and we can kind of run through it individually. We're done there?
I was going to say, is that if it's not done, it's just a stream.
Yeah, just going to go to the final slides, which is to say thanks for attending. Sorry if we didn't manage to get through everything and get everyone's kind of app working. But like I say, come and see us at the booth, or if you're online, you can join our community Slack channel, and it's got yes, there's in the show code hackathon. Yeah, thanks everyone for that. Hope you enjoyed it.